The phenomenon, the pride of the Philippines, Alex Eala.
Andy Roddick doesn't do this. That's the first thing you need to understand before any of this makes sense. The man spent over a decade at the top of professional tennis, won a Grand Slam, reached 4 major finals, and when he finally stepped away from the game, he built one of the most brutally honest voices in the sport. He doesn't sit behind a microphone and hand out praise because it sounds good. He doesn't hype players to fill airtime. When Andy Roddick says something nice about you, you've earned it in a way that made even him stop and think. So when he looked into the camera after sitting down with a 20-year-old from Manila and said the words, "There's no way I could ever be that pragmatic, that self-aware," the tennis world should have collectively put down whatever it was doing and paid attention. Because that's not a compliment. That's a confession. And confessions from former world number ones don't happen by accident. Alex Eala walked into the Served with Andy Roddick podcast on March 25th carrying something heavier than most people her age will ever understand. She had just come off a round of 16 loss at the Miami Open, a 6-0, 6-2 dismantling at the hands of Karolina Muchova that left absolutely no room for interpretation. No close games, no second set comeback story, no moral victory buried somewhere in the statistics. She got taken apart by a seasoned Grand Slam champion, and the scoreboard told that story in the most unforgiving language tennis has. Most players her age would have arrived at that interview still processing the wreckage. You could forgive a 20-year-old for showing up guarded, deflecting the harder questions with rehearsed answers, or quietly steering the conversation towards safer territory. That's what media training is for. But Eala didn't do any of that. She sat down, looked Roddick in the eye, and talked about pressure, expectations, national responsibility, and the mental architecture required to carry the hopes of 115 million people without cracking under the weight of it. She talked about it the way someone twice her age might talk about it after years of therapy and hard lessons. And Roddick, a man who has interviewed enough players to build a finely tuned radar for the difference between genuine self-awareness and a well-rehearsed performance, just sat there and realized he was outclassed in a conversation about maturity. Think about what it actually means to be Alex Eala right now. She's the first player from the Philippines to break into the WTA top 100. The first to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal. The first to climb into the top 30, which she did just 9 days before that Miami loss, hitting a career-high ranking of 29 before sliding back to 46 after the tournament ended. Every single thing she does on a tennis court is a first for her country. There is no blueprint, no Filipino player who came before her and mapped out how to handle this, no senior teammate who sat her down and said here's what it feels like when an entire nation watches every single point you play. She's writing that manual herself in real time at 20 years old, and according to Andy Roddick, she's writing it better than he ever could have at the same stage of his life. And Roddick wasn't exactly a shrinking violet when he was coming up. He had the weight of American tennis expectations on him for years. He knows what it feels like to represent something larger than yourself on a tennis court. He knows the specific kind of pressure that comes from a country pointing at you and saying you are our hope. He lived inside that pressure for over a decade. So when he says Eala handles it with a composure he never had, that's not false modesty. That's a man measuring her against his own experience and finding himself genuinely surprised by what he sees. The Miami Open told the whole story if you were watching closely enough. On March 19th, Eala played Laura Siegemund in what became a 3-hour, 20-minute marathon. Down a set, she clawed her way back, forced a second set tiebreak, and then closed it out in a deciding third. The longest match of her professional career, and she walked off that court looking collected. Not relieved, not euphoric, just ready. 2 days later, she stepped onto the court against Magda Linette and went straight sets, 6-3, 7-6, efficient and composed, no emotional hangover from the Siegemund war, no hint that she was running on fumes. She just played tennis like the previous match hadn't happened. Then came Muchova. And Muchova didn't just beat her, she dismantled her in a way that exposed real gaps. The kind of gaps that make you question whether a player is truly ready for the highest level or just running hot for a stretch. 6-0, 6-2, done in under an hour. For a lot of young players, that kind of loss becomes a wound that stays open. It follows them into the next match, the next week, the next tournament, sitting somewhere in the back of their mind like a voice they can't turn off. 2 days after that loss, Eala was sitting in front of Roddick talking about the mental side of professional tennis with the clarity of someone who had already closed the chapter on Miami and started reading the next one. That's not denial. That's not pretending the loss didn't hurt. That's something far more sophisticated and far more rare. That's the ability to hold a painful experience without letting it become your identity. Roddick described it as existing in the eye of the popularity storm. That phrase is worth sitting with for a second because it captures something real about what Eala is navigating. The popularity storm isn't just about fans. It's about the weight of being a symbol. When you're the first person from your country to do something in a sport, you stop being just a player. You become proof of something. You become the answer to a question millions of people have been asking. And every time you lose, it feels like you're letting the question go unanswered. Most people crumble under that. History is full of talented athletes who couldn't survive the gap between what they were and what their country needed them to be. Eala is not just surviving it. She's thriving inside it while apparently remaining clear-eyed enough about the whole thing to explain it to a former world number one in a way that makes him rethink his own career. Roddick didn't hold back when the cameras kept rolling after their conversation ended. He called her a trailblazer for her country and then went further, saying she was a gift not just to the Philippines but to tennis itself, to everyone watching, to the sport as a whole. He said he was fascinated by her before they spoke and became a huge fan after. Those are his words, delivered without hesitation, with the kind of specificity that comes from someone who means exactly what they're saying. He wasn't filling space. He was staking his credibility on a 20-year-old he just met and finding that bet completely justified. Now, all of this lands in a very specific context for the WTA Tour, because the tour has a challenge it doesn't always like to talk about openly. The pipeline of young talent is real, but the pipeline of young talent that can handle everything that comes with stardom, the cameras, the expectations, the sponsorship scrutiny, the weight of a fan base that treats your wins like community celebrations and your losses like personal grief, that pipeline is much smaller. Players who can perform under that kind of load without either burning out or becoming robotic in their public persona are genuinely rare. Eala seems to be one of them.